Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending today's opening webinar to our Power Webinar series focused on enterprise asset management, or as you'll hear us at AssetWorks refer to it as most of the time, EAM. My name is Rick Seisel. I'll be acting as moderator for today's presentation, which will focus on how to understand legislation's effect on your organization. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a second. Before we do that, I did want to take a moment to introduce today's presenter, Jim Hammond. For some of our customers in attendance, you most likely know Jim is the guy who answered all of your questions following an in-depth product demo or session at the annual AssetWorks Academy. As an expert of all things EAM, we're very excited to have him as the presenter for this three-part Power Webinar series. Today, he'll be discussing the impact of legislation such as MAP-21 and the FAST Act, but more importantly, some of the key questions that you should be asking yourselves to ensure that you're being proactive about the ramifications. Just one last housekeeping item before we get started here. The microphones have been muted, so if any of you do have any questions at any time during the presentation, you are encouraged to use the WebEx chat tool. All of you should see a tiny chat icon. It's located right in the top right corner of your screen, and this acts as an instant messaging tool. So please feel free to use the WebEx chat tool to enter any questions during the presentation. Make sure to send them to host, and I'll be happy to field and relay them to Jim. At the conclusion of our presentation, we will have time for some brief Q&A at that time. All right, so I think I've stolen enough airtime from Jim at this point. Jim, looks like we can see your screen, and all looks good. You can take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good.
All right, great. Okay, well, thanks Rick, and thanks everybody. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in. Quick overview of an agenda for today. When I started thinking about this series, one of the very first questions I asked myself was, how does legislation affect organizations, and specifically, city and county organizations? So we'll take a quick look at history. We'll look at some examples of legislation that affect us all, and some pretty obvious and some maybe not. And then we'll dive into MAP-21 and the FAST Acts. Some of those who may be at the state level agencies are very familiar with these, but others at the city and county, these may be new and familiar terms to you. So we'll talk about the differences between the impact between the states and the city and county agencies and how they impact you. And then we'll dive a little bit into what we're going to talk about in the next series, the considerations of implementing risk-based and asset management plans, and of course some time for question and answers at the end. Okay, so just to kind of provide some perspective and set the stage, when I was doing a little research on this topic, I came across some really interesting quotes I thought I would share and how that impacts all of us in the asset management world. But George Washington reflected that one of America's greatest problems was its tyranny of distance. And John Calhoun in the 1800s urged his fellow congressmen to bind the republic together with a perfect system of roads and canals. Right? And Franklin D. Roosevelt, in more recent times in the Works Progress Administration, said, "I do not look upon these United States as a finished product. We're constantly in the making." And in reference to the National Highway System, which started through the Federal Aid Highway Act 1956, Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "Together, the united forces of our communications and transportation systems are dynamic elements in the very name we bear, United States." Okay? So with that, a couple examples, of legislation that impacts us all in our daily work lives and even our personal lives. But whether it's the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water or Endangered Species Act or the Americans with Disabilities Act, we are all impacted in our daily decisions in our work lives regarding these types of legislation. So whether it's constructing a new building or paving a new road, these things that we have to comply with affect our budgets, our resources, and our timelines, and they're critical elements, because in the end, we do these things to make our world a better place, okay? So talking about some new legislation, MAP-21, we're moving ahead for progress in the 21st century. This was a bill signed by President Obama in 2012. And it funds the surface transportation programs through the year 2014. but more importantly, it had some major restructurings in place, some consolidations of many disparate funding bills. It streamlines these new programs into core programs, and then has tenants in there for addressing safety issues, public safety issues, and multimodal transportation options, and freight and trucking industry considerations. But some of the major cornerstone as it pertains to us in the transportation asset management world is the goal of establishing more effective investment, improved decision making, and let me just once again. And in doing this, by better defining objectives, goals, and measurable targets, and increasing accountability and transparency. Okay, and so as a result of doing all this, the states and MPOs, or the metropolitan planning organizations, are required to develop a risk-based asset management plan. Okay, and a key tenet there is failure to adhere or meet the defined performance goals and standards actually may result in reduced funding. Okay. So the FAST Act, this is an extension essentially of MAP-21, or Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. This was signed into law just last year by President Obama, and it funds the surface transportation programs all the way through the year 2020. And as I mentioned, it essentially just builds upon MAP-21. It strengthens or more solidifies those performance-based goals and plans and target philosophies. There were measures introduced to accelerate project delivery, essentially cutting through the red tape and lessening the excuse factor of why projects may not be coming on time, be completed on time, and puts more teeth into actually exercising penalties that could be incurred for not meeting compliance. Okay. So again, what is required at the state and today MPO level? This major tenet is the establishment and adherence of that risk-based asset management plan to determine, measure performance, and defining quantifiable goals and targets to meet, recording those over time, and then reporting those results to the federal government. When MAP-21 was first introduced, states were given 4 years to come up with their first report. So that would be this year. And then every other year thereafter, they need to report on the state of good repair or the state of all the assets in the infrastructure world, the transportation infrastructure world that they manage. Okay. Now, these final rules that you may have heard about, if you are familiar with MAP-21 and the FAST Act, are kind of a sliding scale. Okay. Because initially there was a lot of vague verbiage, not clearly defined timelines for requirements. And as a result, the groups that are managing this rollout of this bill held a lot of public hearings. You received a lot of feedback and input from all the state stakeholders about these new regulations and legislation. And so they took that information and they molded that, and then they set more defined timelines and more definitive concrete requirements from that. And so those resulted in a lot of final rules that are being released. One was released this summer where transit agencies, as of October 2016, they are required to have submitted all of their defined performance targets. And as of October 2017, a minimum standards for the states to use in developing and operating all of their bridge and pavement management systems must be designated. Okay? And then as a function of what is a risk-based asset management program, you start asking yourself some questions immediately. Well, define risk, right? Is it failure of the asset, or the risk of failure of the asset, or risk to my budget or to public safety? Well, per the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA, risk is defined as the positive or negative effects of uncertainty or variability upon agency objectives. Okay? So as a function of these requirements, goals, strategies, and objectives will be defined, and in doing so, kind of the basic tenets of that are these things that you see listed here. Context, right? So this essentially involves understanding, the social, cultural, legal, regulatory, political, economic environment in which an agency operates, or that bubble in which you do all of your business. Okay, and then within that environment, identifying what are those things that can affect our defined objectives, okay? And then the probability, or the analysis, the probability of the defined risks materializing and what their consequences may be. And these can be qualitative, a subject matter expert providing their opinion, or quantitative, where strict condition indexes are defined for specific asset category and then recorded over time and analyzed over its life cycle. Okay. Evaluation. This step is basically the decision support or decision making, and by comparing the magnitude of risk to the organization's tolerance of it. So, for example, a young, healthy tree in the middle of a park carries much less risk than a 100-year-old oak overhanging the middle of an intersection. Okay, and then the treatment, risk treatment. So, what's referred to as the 5 T's. Do you treat risk? Do you tolerate risk or transfer it, maybe in the form of insurance? Do you terminate by disposing of the asset itself, or take advantage of it? Because again, not all risk is negative, right? There could be opportunities to leverage in realizing risk. Okay, and so with that, this is just a sample risk register that can be defined. There are no steadfast requirements on how you define your risk or a risk register for the assets. And as you can see from here, they can be different categories, whether that's at the enterprise level, the programmatic, or the operationals level. But you can define what the risk event is, and then down below on the left-hand side, you see what is the likelihood of that risk occurring through, in this case, a 1 through 5 scale, and what is the impact of that risk occurring, and again, in this case, a 1 through 5 scale. And those two values are then multiplied together, coming up with the ranking of risk here. Okay, and so this is just an example of what a risk register may look like in a given organization. So, how does all of this affect you, the requirement of establishing a risk-based asset management program? These are things that are happening in the state level today. But there's evidence and the writing on the wall to suggest that this kind of requirement will trickle down on a state-by-state basis to city and county organizations. And a couple of the tangible reasons include cities and counties maintain a portion of the NHS, or the National Highway System. And because they maintain a portion of that, the states may then mandate that from the cities and counties, that they need the specific data from them that then give them the ability to report that up to the federal government. And given also that cities and counties get a significant funding, portion of their funding from the states in turn have some leverage over you to mandate that you then provide this type of information. And then ultimately, if this is going to be required as a city or a county agency, and you're starting to adopt this, why would you only do it for a small fraction of your entire roadway network? Because of the ultimate advantages of implementing something like this, it would make sense at that point in time to adopt it system or network wide. Okay. Okay, so what are the challenges then in implementing something like a risk-based asset management plan? Well, change, right? There's always resistance to change. The path of least resistance is common, but those things aside, who's going to implement it? Who has the institutional expertise or resources to implement that? Who's going to pay for those individuals that maybe have to be hired to manage something like this? And all those other usual suspects, right, that can impact challenges or resistance to adopting something like this. Another component to this might be vague or difficult to interpret requirements. All of the verbiage in the legislation simply wasn't as clear. The timelines weren't necessarily set. And in many cases, they were intentionally left vague to provide flexibility to the states and other agencies that adopt these practices. Again, the flexibility to, mold this to what works for them, okay? The good news, however, is that because states are actively going through this now as a function of these legislative requirements, they're learning and have begun the process of becoming institutional experts. They've gone through the growing pains. They know where to go, what path to go down and what path to avoid. So they are great resources, so your state contacts can be a starting place for implementing plans like this. Okay, and then the advantages and opportunities. There are many, right? While the challenges abound, the ultimate goal is to do something like this is you're going to get more out of it than otherwise. So it's an opportunity here for your leadership to coalesce and communicate with all of their own stakeholders, get that feedback, adopt that feedback, and then get full organizational buy-in, right? Everybody's on the same page and supports that decision. And then the better decision process. So at a very high level, knowing what I have, where is it, what's it costing me, what is its tolerance to risk, you know, through managing or having a system in place that allows you to access that information at your fingertips, it simply, you know, facilitates fast and accurate decision making. Transparencies, you know, so instilling trust and confidence in your customers, the taxpayers, you know, goes a long way. Knowing that you're effectively spending the money that they're providing you, you know, like I say, goes a long ways. And as well, your overseers, the federal government, instilling trust in them that the money they grant to you and the federal funds they give you, that you're effectively spending and you're inputting that into the right projects, makes a difference. Okay, and then improved safety. You know, better maintained assets inherently lend towards safer assets, and that situational awareness just inherently lends to that safety. And then finally, you know, the maximization, you know, whether it's simultaneously, you may maximize your capital investment through extending the asset longevity while reducing equipment you need to maintain that through optimization of your PM programs, okay? And then ultimately, you save money, right? And when you save that money, you can better spend it on other projects that might also need your attention, okay? So in adopting that risk-based asset management plan, you know, where do you start? Well, we'll get into this next week, but you can start where you're comfortable and lean on your strengths. All of us are already doing things like maybe it's a condition-based plan, or maybe you are doing worse first, or whatever that may be. But no doubt, through the requirements and foundations of a risk-based asset management plan, there are components that you are already very good at, and you can start there. And know that it is a journey, and in that it takes time. MAP-21's been around for 4 years, and some states are just rolling out with their first reports to the federal government. So this is not something that happens overnight. And again, as I mentioned before, you can leverage the experience and knowledge that states are actively obtaining. So you can use them as sounding boards and how to do this and how not to do this, right? So with that, next week we're going to be diving into, you know, how to effectively construct an asset or a risk-based asset management plan and go into a lot of the methodologies and details of that. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
All right, thank you everyone. We are now going to open up the floor for some of your questions. And just as a quick reminder, if you do have any questions at this time, please send them to host using the WebEx chat tool on your screen. Provided that we do have enough time, I'll pass your question to Jim. I'll be happy to give you his answer. All right, Jim, so we did have some questions that came through, one of which is, where would I find more detail about the requirements and what is involved in implementing this type of asset management plan?
Yeah, okay. So quick Google search. There's a wealth of information online that speaks to MAP-21, the FAST Acts, and all the regulations that are imposed specifically, you know, to the transportation asset managers. If you go to FHWA's website or ASHTO's website, there are specific sample plans that you can refer to. I'll speak more to this next week, but there are international standard organizations, or the ISO 55000 plans, where you can do searches on those methodologies and get a lot of detail from those as well.
Okay. Jim, the next question is in regards to the risk register that you showed. So what are some examples of opportunities to include in a risk register?
Some examples of opportunities?
Correct.
Yeah, as opposed to negative, everything being in a negative consequence. You know, that could be appreciation of owned land parcels, unexpected appreciations. That's one off the top of my head. Windfall through grants. If you're doing application of grants for money and there wasn't necessarily the expectation within the budget to get those grant funds would be another example. I'll come up with some more and get back to you.
Sure, thanks. And let's see here. What kind of ROI can an organization expect?
Yeah, so you know, obviously there's going to be an initial investment in adopting like this. And again, many of you are already doing many of these components of, you know, an asset management plan. It may be just changing things up to take into consideration what risk is, okay? So in terms of some tangible return on investment, there may be realization in adopting this plan in terms of you know, that capital investment funds, I'm going to save money by extending the longevity of my assets, right? Or more tuned PM programs where I don't need as many pieces of equipment or staff or resources, which will then save money against my operating budgets.
Okay, all right. Well, excellent job today, Jim. It looks like that is all the time we have for today. At this time, I would like to thank all of you once again for taking the time to attend today's presentation, and hopefully all of you have secured some valuable takeaways to keep in mind moving forward. We do hope to have you with us for the next 2 webinars in our Asset Management to the Rescue Power Webinar series. And Jim, just very quickly, I would like to thank you on behalf of AssetWorks once again for sharing your expertise with some of these critical items with everybody today. So as you can see here, Jim's contact information is available should any of you have any follow-up questions or concerns. And also, we'll be sending out an email in the next day or so with today's webinar recording. And all of you will receive a reminder for next Wednesday's Part 2 webinar focused on how to construct an asset management plan, where we'll be raising the all-important questions of what do I have, where is it, and how much is it costing me? Once again, we hope you'll join us, and I want to thank you all for attending. Jim and I will be sticking around for just another few minutes in case any of you still do have questions. Otherwise, have a great day. We look forward to having you with us next time.